how do we continue to advance as a society. If we are aiming to improve the quality of our lives, if we're aiming to advance in our technology, if we're aiming to advance as a society, I don't think we can leave behind either technology or sort of a deeper sense of human wisdom. I might say the soul. I might say, both the human and the kind of non-human, more than human spirit realm, whatever those two things are. I don't think we get there by leaning too far in one direction or too far in the other direction.
Welcome to the Humanity Code Conversations. I'm Heidi Lawrenson, and today we'll explore another perspective on intentionally shaping the future with AI, where our technology amplifies our shared humanity rather than diminishes it. Today's guest is someone who's been championing a bold and necessary evolution in how we lead and live, and the wisdom that lies beyond algorithms and spreadsheets. And she's a dear friend and mentor. LeeAnn Mallorie is the founder, CEO, and the dynamic force behind Guts and Grace, a company that's redefining how we navigate the complexities of the workplace and life with our whole selves, as Guts and Grace implies. In nearly 2 decades as a transformational coach, LeeAnn has worked with leaders across the globe, helping them tap into what she calls the deeper wisdom of the body and soul. But don't mistake this for a talk about mindfulness. Her work cuts to the core of something we desperately need in today's world. Leadership that harmonizes the logical with the intuitive, the assertive with the empathetic, the yin and the yang of humanity itself. In our increasingly fast-paced, tech-driven world, LeeAnn's message is particularly urgent. She's here to remind us that embracing what society has come to undervalue, perhaps intuition, creativity, and balance, isn't just good for us as individuals. It's essential for building the kind of human-centered systems, including artificial intelligence, and increasingly built by artificial intelligence. How can these softer, I'm using air quotes for those just listening, sidelined values be the key to shaping AI that reflects the full spectrum of human potential? LeeAnn's perspective could change the way you think about what it means to lead, innovate, and thrive in this pivotal moment for humanity. So let's get into it. Hey, LeeAnn, thank you so much for joining the show.
Hi, Heidi. Thank you for having me. And I hear you introduce me, and I sound pretty awesome. Thank you.
You are.
It's always a pleasure to hear how someone else sees you also. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I think we all need to be reflecting back to each other what we see. So yesterday marked the 2-year anniversary of ChatGPT being introduced to the world. And that was a moment that accelerated humanity's interaction with AI, putting this super powerful tool in all of our hands. And so in a time where the logic of machines, and maybe not necessarily the logic of humans, dominates right now, how can integrating the deeper wisdom of the body and soul, as you say, in leadership, how can that help us navigate this rapidly evolving and sometimes overwhelming time?
I mean, this is such a big question. It's probably what we'll talk about the whole time we are here together. But to take a first pass, I would say for me, it is the essential question of how do we continue to advance as a society? If we are aiming to improve the quality of our lives, if we're aiming to advance in our technology, if we're aiming to advance as a society, I don't think we can leave behind either technology or sort of a deeper sense of human wisdom. I might say the soul. I might say, both the human and the kind of non-human, more than human spirit realm, whatever those two things are. I don't think we get there by leaning too far in one direction or too far in the other direction. So for me, this question of how can we actually incorporate the two, or how do we work with the two, is fundamental to what I think about and what I practice inside of Guts and Grace. So, I mean, that's sort of why I'm here and why I wanted to do this with you, why I said yes to do this with you. What else do you want to talk about that? Like, give me because I can go any direction here. What's the first?
Well, maybe just share for people what Guts and Grace means. Why did you name your company that? And you were just talking about the two things. So talk a little bit about that, just to lay some groundwork.
The two, right? So we could say technology and spirit. We could say the masculine and feminine. We could say straight lines and circles. We could say, really working with the mind and working with the body. The real reason why Guts and Grace is called Guts and Grace, initially, I wasn't sure. What I knew was that I was interested in more sort of full embodiment and full expression as humans. I knew that I had found on my own journey that just working through the mind, learning through the mind, leading through the mind, healing through the mind wasn't getting me everywhere that I wanted to go. And as an executive coach to top teams and leaders, I found that that was so for most of the folks I supported, frankly, especially for women. But I really found that it was necessary to go in a different direction and to listen more deeply. What that took me into was the realm of the body, the realm of intuition, the realm of, we could say, wisdom, certainly now more and more, also the realm of more ancient technologies, plant medicine technologies, technologies of spirit, of deeper listening, more indigenous practices, these kinds of things. And again, I don't think we get away with leading well at this moment in time if we're not able to speak both languages. Let's just say it that way. So Guts and Grace is, currently utilized as a body of women's leadership training work. But it's really a series of practices that are designed to help us come more into relationship with ourselves in the ways we might be out of balance. So it turns out that if I'm, super disconnected from my mind, from my capacity to make clear decisions, from technology even, right, that I may be missing a whole part of the puzzle. And same thing on the other side. If I'm really good with my mind, if I lead from my, kind of knowledge base, for example, but I'm missing all of the cues that are happening below the neck, I'm probably missing something as well. And so Guts and Grace is really an invitation to all of us, regardless of gender, and frankly, regardless of whether we're in leadership roles or not, to consider what we may be missing. And are there ways that we're actually out of balance, that we're not paying attention to both sides of this conversation inside of us, inside of our organizations and teams, and in the way that we're doing and building society?
Yeah. So AI can write code, it can draft documents, it can analyze data. So to your point about balance, it can do all this in seconds, which is amplifying productivity and efficiency. And so it almost feels like we now have a plethora of the guts, so Guts and Grace, or the yang, or yin and yang. And I don't mean to diminish the value of the yang, as you just said, but how can leaders or anyone really embody this yin yang, Guts Grace, line circle dynamic to complement what AI can't deliver?
Yeah, let me actually speak a little bit about first my perspective on that. We have been living in a society for quite some time where speed is prioritized. And don't get me wrong, I like to do things fast. I really like when I can do 10 things in the space of time it used to take me to do one. I would say there's something in my probably human ego that's like, yes, more, better, faster it's got to be responsive, right? And in some ways it is. In some ways, in some contexts, in some situations, just having this particular piece of data processed twice as fast, or 10 of them processed in the speed of time, I'm certainly benefiting from it as a human. What's interesting, if you take the perspective, though, when I put on my hat as an embodiment teacher, also in a way as a mindfulness teacher, as someone who works with this, in a way, slower paced aspect of our development, and relationally, let's say human to human, there's this expression like moving at the speed of trust, or like there's certain things you can't rush. And our growth and development through the body is the same. It takes time for something not just to be a good idea, but to actually be fully embodied. It takes time from the moment that I realize that's not a great habit to actually change that habit. It takes time for us to grow into our ability to fully express ourselves. It takes time for us to deeply understand ourselves. It takes time to listen to each other. And what I think we're at risk of with some of the pace that AI is enabling us to move, not because AI is doing it, not because there's anything wrong with AI, but because of our innate human tendency to perhaps prioritize that rush, if you will, prioritize the more is better, the speed, then are we missing steps? Are we moving at a pace that actually, in fact, in an embodied way, we can't keep up with? That perhaps our hearts can't keep up with, that perhaps our maturity, let's say, can't keep up with. And so this is what I think is interesting about this conversation, the speed and the pace that we're gaining from these tools. Are we mature enough to integrate what we can now do? And if we're not, what are the costs and consequences of that? And are we able, and also are we willing to track for those costs and consequences? Because if we're not, we may be doing cleanup later. And this is why I think this is a very interesting moment in time. It's why, in many ways, my work has been doubling down on inviting people into deeper embodiment, listening, paying attention, knowing what's really true for us, not skipping a step, being able to track what's happening emotionally for me and someone else that I'm interacting with, for example, because it'll be easier and easier and easier to miss those things going forward.
Yeah, it's almost like, are we fit for the moment? Are we ready for the moment?
I said our AI is ready for us. It's doing everything it needs to do and well and better and faster. Are we ready for AI, and can we keep up with it? I think that's the
Beautiful.
question.
I love that. So to double down on that and somatics for maybe those who aren't as familiar with that. So AI is already increasingly guiding many of us, whether it is fitness routines or, providing advice or workplace productivity. So we are at risk of becoming disconnected from ourselves and even our bodies. So what are somatic practices, and how can they ground us in a world where AI is driving us to prioritize efficiency over presence, perhaps? And what are some of the benefits and, better decisions, et cetera?
My first answer is I wish I knew the answer. Like, what are the right practices? I don't know that I actually know that. I would say I'm in an exploration of that because many of the tools that I'm in practice with have been around for a long time. And are they exactly the tools that we need going forward? I don't know. So I'm doing a lot of reevaluation. I would say, let me talk about somatics for a moment. What's interesting about embodiment and somatics at this moment in time in 2020, end of the year 2024, it's become, I would say, more trendy to be interested in the life of the body. The word somatics, I didn't really use a lot in my coaching and my practice for many years. Certainly, I'm trained in lineages that do, somatics being the study of and the working with. This word soma comes from Greek, the living body and its wholeness. And it's really come to mean almost in my discipline work, whether it be therapy, whether it be coaching, whether it be practices or some kind of training that don't just work with the mind, because we've been leaning so far in that direction, but that actually bring in the rest of the body, that bring in our heart brain and our gut brain, that bring in our entirety, that we are, again, learning from that, that we're perhaps healing through that. Certainly, there's a lot of somatic work that's pointed in this moment toward healing of trauma. There's somatic work that's pointed in this moment toward leading, but leading in a way that I'm taking more into account my emotions, my sensations, what's happening, again, below the neck. So this is the world of somatics, we could say, of embodiment. And at this moment in time, what we are practicing, I'm going to come back to your question, what we're practicing somatically, I think can support us to be in more awareness of what we're doing and how we're navigating with the tools that are available to us. So if I come back to this question, like what type of a practice, let me just give an example. For example, in embodied leadership work, we might teach a basic centering practice. We might teach a practice that helps one to know as a leader, am I more in a state of fight or flight? Am I more in a triggered state? Am I kind of reacting to the moment, or am I more sat back, more grounded, more in my body, if you will, and more in present time? And if I'm doing so, I might be breathing more deeply. I might be more expansive in my presence as opposed to more tight or narrow. Perhaps my muscles are more relaxed. And as we would say, as we would do a practice like this, that I'm more present, I'm more open, I'm more connected, I'm more connectable to others, I'm more able to really see what's happening. Now, I would say, for example, that this type of practice, which is a really standard beginning point, if I'm working with someone in a body leadership way, is useful. Because if I'm programming AI, or if I'm just doing something, I'm writing something, or I'm producing something using ChatGPT, let's say, and I am in a state of reactiveness and in a state of heightened emotion, for example, or in a state of not centered, the opposite of centered, what may happen is that whatever I'm producing, and producing even more quickly, is coming from that state. I mean, that's interesting right now. We're in a fairly hot political time. And if we, let's say, need or want to collaborate to work together to solve things in a bipartisan way, if we need or want to communicate across boundaries, and we're rapidly using AI through a heightened state of emotion in a triggered way, communicating, designing things, writing things, what are we reproducing? We're reproducing our triggers, we're reproducing our ego, reproducing, you name it. So there's the first layer, which is simply, what am I practicing in myself that then is getting amplified through the amplification that happens with these tools. Then, of course, there's the second layer, which is, and then while I'm doing that, I'm training these tools. So my AI learning to be centered is my AI learning a heightened state of emotion and how we tend to respond. Because at this stage, mostly I would say our AI is learning to replicate what we ask it to replicate. It's learning to reproduce. It's learning what we want. And if what we want is not centered, if what we want is out of body, if what we want is disconnected, then we're going to get more and more of that coming through. And then that ends up getting trained to the tools that we are hoping will serve us over time. So then the next time I go in there, like, well, do you want me to throw this jab at someone else? Or do you want me, like, because it's now learned that that's what I want.
Right.
That's a very long-winded answer. And I think we've been different places.
It's beautiful. It definitely captures what drives me and the humanity code, because we have this window of time where we need to be super intentional. And as you underscore, not only AI is only as good as what we input into it. And part of that is our value system. And what gets super complicated is when you ask the question, whose values, right? And is there, some kind of universal set? Because what we go into AI with, will often perpetuate biases or overlook some of the human nuance, kind of that, acceleration of what may not be the best of us. So
you mentioned this, using AI for exercise. I want to give like hopefully a really non-triggering but interesting example, because we can be in quite vast, whose values, which value, like that could take us many places. We can certainly, but in just a really mundane. So I'm using an AI tool to support me to exercise better, right? It's an app, let's just say. And let's just say that my conditioning, let's just say that my current habits around exercise are, to build muscle by wearing myself out and to, y'all are going to get to know me here. You're going to go back to the more, better, fast, hard, simply because, hey, I work in the corporate sector. A lot of what I end up doing with leaders is deprogramming from some of the things that are our default values, if you will, in corporate. And often what that looks like when someone comes to me from a coaching perspective is, I've burned myself out. What can I do? I still want to lead. I still want to make an impact. I'd like to grow my influence, but I can't keep doing it that way. So you'll hear a little bit of my bias in this example based on what I've already said. But let's just say, someone's programming is in the direction of, again, harder, faster, more, but they're wanting to exercise to reduce stress, or they're wanting to exercise, let's say, to come into more calm or more balance, or to have a different state when they go back to work. But let's just say, again, their tendency, what they're going to program that app for, is in the direction of what they already practice. So then I'm getting more instruction to do more of the same kind of exercise, or more exercise in a lengthy or overextended or over-efforting kind of way. Now my app is reproducing again the very thing that I've already been embodying and practicing, that actually I might need to disrupt in order to have a different experience. And I don't think our apps and our AI at this stage are going to be very good at supporting that kind of disruption. They're stroking our egos. They're giving us what we say that we want. And without a certain amount of awareness or tracking, that may be taking us down the same old rabbit hole again. Not if that makes sense, but what you mentioned earlier, and I was thinking, how does this play out in like a really seemingly, innocuous kind of thing. But if it's like, yes, I like it, and yes, that's replicating something, then it keeps getting replicated.
Yeah, no, that underscores the need for sort of empowerment of the humanity right now, right? And ensuring that we remain confident in what we are built for, in what we need right now, in what we need for the long term in the future. And how do you guide people to live in that empowerment? And, while keeping a sense of purpose, a strong sense of vision. I mean, these are really, really big questions that we're confronting right now. And I know you're great at helping bring people along.
Well, I guide them imperfectly, as we all do. And I would say I guide them listening to through my own practice of continuing to track my habits and tendencies, come more fully into my own body, practice grounding, centering, being present in the moment, not in my future or my past. And that doesn't totally answer your question, but I want to start there because as a leader, I would say the first answer to any question like this is your own practice, right? For me, our instincts, our human and probably beyond human, not like technology, but like, right, animalistic and or spiritual instincts can track where we've crossed a line. I think they can track when we're depleting ourselves versus filling ourselves up. I think they can track when I've said something that hurts someone else. I think they can track that something feels a little bit off. In a way, the next move is everything because the next move is I choose to listen to that or I don't choose to listen to that. I blow by that, I override that, or I get curious about that, honor that, call it out, maybe name it. And so this moment of free will that is more available when we go slow, to come back to where we were before, cultivating our capacity to be in relationship with that, I think is probably the most important practice that I would recommend, however you choose to do it, right? Whether it's through something more like a standard kind of mindfulness practice, whether it's through the type of embodied practices I teach, whether it's some other avenue that you find, that staying in fierce relationship with that listening and then willing to pause, willing to interrupt, willing to question, willing to take a different action. And again, it does ask us to slow down. But I think as leaders, if we are committed to that, if we're in an ongoing building of relationship with that, we have the possibility to notice when our relationship with the tools we're using may have gone beyond our values, or to notice when maybe they're aligned with our values but are causing harm to someone with a different set of values or on the different side of a conversation. I think without that cultivation, and it's not just a cultivation, right? So you can cultivate that capacity and then you can ignore it in the moment and miss it. But it's like both a cultivation and a commitment to use your language, the humanity code, to staying human, commitment to a daily practice of a moment to moment practice of paying attention in that way, which does ask more of us. It does require us to some extent to pay more attention, to slow down a little bit more. It doesn't mean that we can't go fast, I don't think. I sometimes move very fast, right? Sometimes those instincts can be very strong, but it's more like I tell the difference between those and then something else. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, but I think this is the territory that we actually want to lead well during this time. We have to be willing to get into this type of territory.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, you mentioned the word instinct. And I think that is, or I know that's a lot of what is an output of the kind of work that you do, is kind of that strengthening of instinct. And yet that can be very uncomfortable. How have you seen that played out? And do you have some examples of people that you've worked with where once they've started this new, not new approach, but a returning approach to, kind of our whole selves, how has that played out well? Because I imagine, without having experienced it, it can just feel like, oh, I'm going to go off the deep end into the world of the soft and the weak. And
Yeah, well, a whole lot. My world gets a pretty bad rap, I would say, or has, maybe less so now. Again, since the pandemic, I would say, embodiment. Some of these topics are like more loved and embraced than they have been in certain circles. But I agree with you. You said there's like an uncomfortable, like, yeah, this stuff is less comfortable than like, let me push a button, get the answer and go. It just is. Because it isn't so black and white. It is more messy. It does, again, ask us to feel, for example, which who wants to do that, right? I have found that the payoff is great. And I do think that it asks us to go into places that perhaps we would just rather bypass and avoid. Also, instinct is interesting because I do use this word. I do think that as someone comes more into relationship with the wisdom of their body, learns to listen more, thaws out a little bit, begins to or deepens the capacity to feel, we start to have more of like a gut knowing of things. And then there's, of course, am I in the practice of knowing and then doing something else? Or do I like know and then I listen to it, follow it, trust it, at least experiment with it, try it on? But there's also a way that like, our reptilian brain is sort of part of our instinct too. So you could say, to just play my own devil's advocate a bit, that triggers are connected to our instinct too. So it's not like, oh, you're in your instinct if you're not triggered and then vice versa. So it's a bit messy.
It's all about listening.
Totally. Let's say that we're saying we're cultivating, an instinct that is a wise instinct, the part of our instinct that can guide us to make even better choices or to be connected or to be with our values or these kinds of things. Examples wise, so many. I would say the typical trajectory of someone that I work with is there has been a knowing about something that might be I'm misaligned in my career. That might be our company culture is not quite what it should be, but I don't know why or how it got there, for example. I'm working with someone right now who is an entrepreneur who built an amazing social impact business. And then a number of years in, she just realized there's something off. Like we've kind of missed the mark. People aren't quite behaving in this culture in the way that I envisioned. And actually what she felt, like what turned her on to that, certainly she heard things, right? And like got some examples of what people were practicing that was a little off the original vision for the practice. But what she felt was heartbreak. What do I do with that? Like I'm trying to lead a business and I feel like my heart is broken. But actually, in a way, right, that heartbreak led her to be able to take a different kind of risk in saying to the team, I think we've gotten lost somewhere. And I'm really, profoundly sad about that. And actually what happened was the team was like, gosh, we are too. We really believed what this could become. And even many of those who were in perhaps practices that were not aligned with the values, but it was really their humanity, their instinct in that kind of knowing something's off type of a way that opened the door for them to say, let's recalibrate together. Let's actually talk about this and let's slow down and let's rebuild something. And, I think if I come back to AI, I think we can, if we're in those kinds of practices, then put AI in service of that rebuilding. But we can also have used AI to just move faster and missed that moment or to cover in some way that moment. So this is the humanity inside of what happens with the tools that we've built. Are we in, maybe I say like, I haven't thought of it this way before, but it's almost like it asks us to be even more human because they're going to do all the stuff that the technology is going to do all the stuff that we could have done if we weren't so human. So now what's our job? Our job is to actually that, very positive ghost in the system that is actually the humanizing force. Like we have to be extra human now that we're using these tools. I hope, right? I hope it goes that way. I think that that could be an invitation. Like maybe let's say if you're listening and you want to take that on, what does that look like? It looks different for Heidi, for me, for someone else, perhaps.
Yeah. And, a lot of what this more human element implies is what some people refer to as soft skills. And I'm using the air quotes again here. And, I often will, and I know you would agree, think of them as the power skills ultimately. And with AI increasingly, making decisions, whether it's in hiring or healthcare, it does lack this, some of these soft skills, the intuition, the empathy at this point, anyway. A couple questions within this question. How do you see and reframe these qualities? Because they are just dismissed as soft skills, as essential. But then how can we think about them? Elaborate a little bit more, and you touched upon it a bit, in shaping AI and shaping, more importantly, perhaps a future with AI.
Okay, let me start with part one, and if I forget, bring me back to part two. Oh, background. You read my bio, but I've been for almost 20 years coaching leaders in corporate and government and nonprofit. For me, these quote unquote soft skills really are the tools of the feminine. What does that mean? They are the more yin, the skills, the tools that are more subtle in terms of their importance. And in the world that we've created, that at this moment in history still tends to prioritize very obvious results, a certain kind of pace we've already named. They're a little bit more invisible how they work. So I think in a way we have untrained ourselves to see their value on purpose and by accident, maliciously and not maliciously. And most of my work has really been around it in different contexts, training those I'm supporting, whether it be an executive team of mixed gender or whether it be a woman leader herself, to grok actually how useful they are, what a giant role they actually play. But often it's more like the glue between things, or it's more like culture, right, which is hard to measure, or it's more like some kind of magnetic of relationality, or this sense of broader stakeholders versus a kind of narrow straight line. I think in general, we have work to do to re-empower those parts of ourselves. I could say like the feminine, but not like a man or a woman, like the feminine aspects of ourselves, the more yin aspects of ourselves, to be part of the conversation of leadership. And what's interesting, you know this, I've been recently visiting a number of sacred sites, including a second pilgrimage to ancient Egypt and twice going to ancient Greece, and some of the locations there where, if you follow that thread, like what our society, Western society is today, was very informed by these ancient cultures. And if you go back far enough, who was informing the people who were building society? Women, priestess, mediums, people who were listening to spirit. What were they? How are they doing that? Ancient rituals that are akin to the kinds of rituals that we see Indigenous people still practicing today. So I might get a little lost with your question, but essentially I would say what we have now, in my opinion, is a somewhat degraded version of what initially was blueprinted for us to have as a humanity, in terms of how society works, in terms of what business is and how it works, because we've actually lost the power of these power skills, or we've downgraded our opinion about the power of some of these power skills, as you called them. Okay, so then we bring in AI, right? So then we bring in a technology that is, at this stage, mostly learning from us how to amplify things, how to pick up the pace of things, how to expand things, how to scale things. And it's coming into us in this moment in history where we've sort of lost the reverence for these skills, these tools, these threads, these aspects of our being. What happens now, right? This is the question. So this is kind of my take on this type of skill. Remind me the second question.
Just how it connects. You did start to touch upon it, how it connects with AI, shaping AI, and then ultimately shaping a future with AI that, in my opinion, but, I'd love your take, could possibly be better than this current world that we're living in.
That is certainly what I hope for. So then what my teachers say about embodiment and how we be is that we're always practicing something, and we are what we practice. And so I would say, at this moment in time, we're practicing an ignoring of the feminine aspect of our being, and we're practicing a culture that looks like that. We're practicing, perhaps not using these types of soft skills or putting them in the back seat, for example. And then AI comes in, and then we interact with it from that kind of practice. Well, what we have to remember is that what we are practicing is training our AI. And so at this moment in time, whether we like it or not, whether we feel responsible for that or not, whether we take on, this is my job and I'm doing this or not, whether I'm just, putting some stuff in chat GPT and getting something out and then seeing what happens. Everything we're doing is interacting with it in such a way that it is training it. We are shaping AI, every single one of us, with what we do right now. So if we are personally practicing something that is not whole, then our AI will be shaped into something that is not whole. What can we do? Brings me back to where we were earlier, right? I think we can decide through our own self-awareness, through our own free will, that we want to practice more wholeness ourselves and pay attention to how we are interacting with AI, and does it actually reflect the best of us, or does it reflect, a half whole aspect of ourselves? Does it reflect our tendency to rush? Does it reflect colonialism? Does it reflect patriarchy? Does it reflect, how do I know? Well, what is that in my own body as I live that? So it's a lot. I mean, I think one could say that is a big responsibility. It's kind of how I have come to live my life in practice anyhow. I will share with you and with the audience, I think you know this about me. I'm currently practicing not using ChatGPT to write my blogs and my marketing, practicing not using AI generated images in most of what I put out online. And that will change, I'm sure. At this moment, I'm practicing that because I feel interested in the human spirit coming through my writing in a different way than at this moment I'm able to get with an AI tool. I'm interested in disrupting versus replicating patterns. And at this moment in time, much of what's being written is pulling from places and synthesizing patterns. So I'm like, I want to do the opposite of that right now in this moment, in some things that I'm working on. And then I'm also practicing a little bit of dissent in terms of a non-human image looks better than a human image, especially for women. The perfection that we can achieve with AI, maybe something else right now, is also valuable. So I'm in a little bit of a practice of something other than using those tools to expedite what I'm able to do as a businesswoman, as a marketer, for example. And I have no judgment about others who are practicing something different. I'm just in my own experiments. I would say there's a possibility to feel into your values, to track your own tendencies, what you embody, where you feel like you're at your best and where you're not, and then make choices accordingly, because you are training AI with what you're choosing. So bringing awareness to your choosing, I think, is the best thing I can offer.
Yeah, that awareness is so key. And you're using the word practice, which I think that is the operative word. If we just stay aware of our interaction with AI, our relationship with AI continually, then, ultimately we will, I think, make better decisions. You mentioned Egypt a bit ago, and it reminded me of something you brought back from your most recent trip that really, really intrigued me. And it really struck a chord because it underscored the true need for balance between, let's say, the yin yang. And it was Egypt had a very different take on ego. And, we've been so, at least in many circles, trained, well, either we're so consumed by ego, right, that it kind of blinds us, or we've been trained, oh, ego is bad. Don't let it take hold. Tell us about what you learned and know about kind of the role of ego from the Egyptians' point of view, ancient Egyptians.
I love this, actually. It was one of because this is my second time going on a similar kind of pilgrimage. And really, we traveled from all the way down the Nile, visited many of the sacred sites, came back up and went to the pyramids and a few other sites there. And it had a different perspective than my first time. And some of that was to do with the really wonderful guides that we had who brought a lot of kind of spiritual looking. But I think my first time around, I was like, well, who was that king or queen to think she needed to build that kind of a monument for herself? And I think it's a good first take, right? And it comes from my analysis of our current society. Like, how are our egos running the show? And is it too much? Much of my leadership training early on before doing embodied work was really focused on the ego and the mind and how it drives us. And what I really got to see at a different level is the extent to which the ancient Egyptians were committed to practicing wholeness, including that one's ego might be part of that equation, not like, oh, I need to leave it out and then try to lead, or I'm gonna, get lost in it. And so it's like the ego is interesting, right? It's like if I'm ignoring it, it's probably running the show in a different way. Like I have a small ego is really the other side of the coin of a big ego, for example. So this sense of balance, a sense of wholeness, a sense of integration of the ego. And I had a sense in being there the second time in some of these temples and some of these sites, like, yes, they're massive. Yes, they, I don't know how to say this, like perhaps the folks who really called for these to be built, which I believe anchor a certain energetic on our planet. We still visit these sites today, right? If someone had built that, would that even exist? And it wouldn't, and we wouldn't still be learning from it. We wouldn't still be whatever energy it holds for us. It wouldn't still be holding it, and we wouldn't still be going back and trying to ask these questions. I believe, maybe not every one of them, but I believe that those who built these great artifacts, monuments that we still visit today, had found a place, some of them had found a place of balance where they could wield that much vision, that much power, that much potential for something, out of this world, impressive, great, that would last for a very long time. But perhaps they were doing it with more self-refinement from a place of more integration or wholeness, like we've been talking about this whole, right? So it's not like don't build the AI. It's not like don't build the pyramid. It's like be a person who can wield that level of power because you've looked at yourself, because you're in practices that actually create an authentic wholeness where you actually you've caught up with yourself in that level of power. I don't think it lasted forever. I think maybe we hit that potentiality when some of these things were built, and maybe it degraded after that. We don't know what happened in between, right? We can look at this thing and be like, wow, how did that go? But I think we're in a similar kind of moment right now, which is why I love that you brought it in, which is we're in a different way. We're not building a physical structure like a pyramid, but we're building something technologically out of this world. And can we be committed to growing into the humans who can wield it? I think that's an interesting question. And our egos will be part of that, right? Or we wouldn't even try. Like we wouldn't have even created this without the egos. We can't be like, oh, and one should just go the other way and not have an ego. But what's our relationship with it?
Love that. And you mentioned the word vision. So if we, the leaders having or not having the vision, but kind of coming into their own so that they can hold that vision, what do you think, put on your vision hat for a moment here. What could the world look like if AI were designed with more of this balance that we've been talking about, whether it is more of the feminine leadership values in mind? And thank you for clarifying that feminine leadership does not mean female leadership. Men, we all have both male and female tendencies, the ego and non-ego, etc. But what could a world look like if it were designed with some of these other values in mind? And if AI was the partner, as you said, to help us co-create that, what possibilities could open up for humanity?
I wish I could see them genuinely. I think it's what we would say, but I don't know if I'm in a place in my own development where I can say it totally with sincerity, like that it wouldn't be cliche. And I just want to be honest. I would say like, oh, well, we could solve hunger and poverty. Like, I think all the things we think we could do that are like our vision of a more utopian society than we have right now. I think we have the potential for many of those things to come to fruition. I can't see it yet. I feel inspiration when I go to some of these ancient places. And of course, we can't really see what it was like then, but I have a sense you can make up like, oh, there was some level of elevation of consciousness, of capacity to do something that today I can look at as a human, like, I don't know how you built that. Like, how was that even possible? I think our technology can enable something like that for us. I think it could be possible that these technologies are leveraged to solve things that may otherwise lead to climate crisis more than we already have, that they could help us solve things that may otherwise lead to war and destruction more than we already have. I can't see exactly what it looks like or how we tip it that direction yet.
Yeah.
Personally,
I mean,
I'm into the path.
yeah, that's just it. It's AI just goes so far behind what we can imagine. That is the challenge. We're being called to ensure that we are shaping a better future. You know, it's kind of hard to argue. Most people would want things to be better than they are now. And yet we literally can't imagine that far. And, you know, it just occurred to me as I'm saying this, that there's a certain amount of trust that entails. And trust is being eroded right now. But I also know you do a lot of work to kind of rebuild inner trust. Where does that fit in?
I was embarrassed that I answered you the way that I did just now, but I couldn't give you another more authentic answer. And actually, what that leads me to say is I think the extent to which I work with and from the feminine has me comfortable with I don't know. It has me comfortable with I can't actually exactly see it yet. But if I could, I'd probably be making something up. And you know what? I need to do that. I actually am like, I can't see it, but I'm committed to the direction. And that's actually enough. It can be enough as because I think sometimes as leaders, we can't actually see. Like maybe we think we see, but we're kind of wrong, or we end up going like this to get there anyway. And maybe that like, here's what it is. And we're just pointing to that as actually part of the old paradigm we're trying to disrupt here a little in this conversation. Like, but it doesn't prevent me. You know, I have a big vision for what I'm up to in the world, for anyone that I serve, what they could possibly be influencing or become. Am I right about it? Not necessarily. Do I need to be? No. And I actually think that's part of what's interesting because we can be committed to the path toward something much better, but a little bit unattached to, is it exactly that way? You know, we many of us will need enough vision. We need enough, here's what it could look like to want to bother. And I think I have enough of that in my own ways. And hopefully anyone listening, it's like, what's enough for you? What are the one or two things that you see or would imagine could be different that have it be worthwhile for you to keep walking your path or build the thing you're building? Or if you are working with AI, that might guide how you would work with it or what you would invite it to do. But I also don't sort of flip in the other direction of like castles in the sky or false promises or something that's like, I don't know. And I'm okay to not know. Actually, it's kind of exciting to not know. It's probably better than what we've been doing to not know. So may we all be a little less clear, but a little more committed to the path.
Yeah, comfortable with the uncomfortable and the unknown. And I have a couple more questions for you. One is, as you are seeing this shift and or at least feeling a need for more of this shift to more whole self, you know, leadership, human-centric mindset, what are the barriers that still exist to us kind of getting there collectively? You know, having the pendulum instead of swinging back and forth to the extremes, you know, kind of getting in that centered part as you talked about at the beginning. What are some of the barriers and what's behind those barriers?
I think there are probably a number of barriers. Where I feel called to go is really where we started, which is pace. I want to speak for myself, and I want to speak for myself as a white woman, which is, you know, however I carry the imprint of whiteness, of colonialism, of patriarchy in my own system. I personally have been working on and I'm aware of my need to rush, that faster is better. And I do think that's one of the big barriers. Because in me, I can see that it has me cut corners, forget my values sometimes, that it has me skip a step that might have been a really important step. And I can say that I've been in a process of rebuilding my business in some ways to move more at the pace of wholeness for me and for the people I serve. And I'm not there yet. So I think that whatever that is, if you are listening and you relate to that inside of yourself, it's not bad or good. It's just, it's a bit of a, the antithesis of that pause, that tracking that I think we all kind of intuitively probably know. It's like, we'll say something simple like, right, I shouldn't have said that. Okay, well, if I'd gone 2 seconds slower, I might not have said that. And we kind of know this about ourselves as humans. So whatever that is, that has been probably both is part of human nature. It probably is part of like the ego, like, let's get there already. And has certainly been part of many movements collectively that have harmed others and continue to do so. I think that's probably one of the big ones from my perspective. And maybe this thing also we're saying, like, our fear of not knowing that has us maybe go faster or overly concretize something before it is ready to be concretized.
So this last question is one that I ask every guest in one way or another. So for those who are not, maybe grappling with, not sure how to move through or even evolve in this pivotal moment, maybe they're feeling overwhelmed. What do you see as the most important step, maybe even just the first step that people can take to unlock both their guts and their grace in order to lead through this time? Again, lead in the broadest sense of the word, not necessarily, being managing others, et cetera, to lead with the purpose and resilience that this moment calls for. And, here at the Humanity Code, we refer to that as being the prompt, taking that action toward potentially a better future.
What I'd love to see people do is design their own experiment. And that comes back to where I was talking about intentional practice earlier. Like, I would really invite anyone who's taken the time to listen to this podcast is to check in with your own values, to check in with yourself in maybe the ways that you aren't aligned or the defaults that you fall into that aren't who you would want to be or who you are when you're at your best in your wholeness. And then if you want, in whatever way you're working with AI, whether you're creating it, coding it, whether you're simply using it, which of course is also, as we've already said, programming it in some way, pick one thing to do on purpose that's a disrupt or an interrupt, or that's in the direction of what you might not otherwise do by default, but that is intentional. I don't care what it is, actually. I think it's just the act of being in an intentional experiment that is aligned with your values, that may disrupt an old habit or pattern, will ask you to slow down a little, might invite a certain kind of mindfulness. And I don't know what you'll find, but it might open an interesting door. It might lead to a whole new product or service if you're creating the tools. And it might lead to just a different way of utilizing them that keeps you on pace with what's important to you otherwise. I think that's what I would wish for anyone who wants to be the prompt and be more of an intentional shaper of these tools at this time.
I love that intentionality.
Literally, like, not what you think others need, right? Like, sorry, I have to say, like, let yourself, your own whatever, like your own place you get most triggered or your own thing you do. I mean, when you asked the question just now of what gets most in the way, I couldn't help but answer from the most personal version of the answer for me. And actually think if we each do that, we're going to get better answers and better practices than if we be like, here's what everybody else needs. Like, okay, what do I need? If I do what I need, for sure other people will benefit from that too. I hope that makes sense.
Oh, it so does. And may it be so. Thank you so much, LeeAnn, for bringing your whole self to us today. I know I appreciate it, and I know the listeners will take a lot away from it. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on the Humanity Code Conversations. Remember, our future with AI is being written now and by us. Let's ensure it's a story that honors and elevates our shared humanity.